I never planned to spend my 40s thinking about death, but that is what happened after the autumn of 1978. My name is Robert Hayes. Back then, I was 42, an accountant in a small firm in Manchester. I had a semi-detached house, a tired marriage, 2 children who thought I was boring, and a Ford Cortina that stalled in the rain. My life was a long, flat line on graph paper. Nothing ever spiked. Nothing ever crashed. It was safe, predictable, and, if I am honest, dull. Everything changed the night I walked into my neighbor's back garden and found her lying on the floor of the shed with the back of her head cracked open. I still remember the weather first, the kind of thick October fog that swallowed the end of the street and stained the orange glow of the lamps into dirty halos. I drove home later than usual, headlights dragging through the mist, the wipers squeaking like old shoes. When I pulled into my driveway, I switched off the engine and just sat there for a moment, listening to the soft ticking of the cooling metal. It was the only sound. Then I heard the thud. It was not loud, just a heavy, dull sound from somewhere behind the houses. Not like a car door or a dustbin lid, more like something solid hitting the ground and not bouncing. I sat still, waiting for a follow-up noise, a shout, another bang, the bark of a dog. Nothing came. The fog pressed in against the windscreen as if listening with me. My wife, Helen, opened the front door and waved. The light from the hallway cut a rectangle in the mist. "You coming in?" she called. "In a bit," I said. Heard something out back. "One." Indescript. She frowned, arms folded against the cold, then shrugged and went inside. I stepped out, closed the car door softly, and followed the sound in my mind to where it must have come from. Our small back garden ended at a wooden fence. On the other side was the property of Margaret Ellis, our elderly neighbor. Her house backed onto ours, her garden a mirror of ours but more neglected in recent years. Mrs. Ellis had moved to a nursing home earlier that year after she'd fallen and fractured her hip. Her son, Peter, told us she would probably not return home. The house was mostly empty. Once in a while, a light went on in one of the rooms when he came to sort things out, but otherwise it was dark and silent. Still, that thud had come from somewhere, and the direction felt right. I walked down the narrow path along the side of my house, my shoes scraping softly on the concrete. The air smelled of damp earth and distant coal smoke. When I reached the back, I saw that the gate between our gardens, usually latched shut, stood slightly open. It moved with a faint creak, nudged by the foggy breeze. "Mrs. Ellis?" I called reflexively, though I knew she shouldn't be there. "Peter?" No answer. The Ellis house lay in shadow. One upstairs window showed a faint glow, as if a light had been left on and half smothered by the curtain. The back garden was darker than ours, the grass longer, the flower beds bare. At the far end stood the old wooden shed, leaning slightly, the roof patched with tar paper. Its door was ajar. I approached slowly. The gap of darkness at the doorway felt wrong. My heart beat a little faster, though I told myself it was nothing, some forgotten tool fallen from a shelf. I reached out and pushed the door. It swung inward with a tired groan. The smell hit me first. Not strong, not like the rot you read about in crime novels. Just a sour, metallic tang mixed with damp wood and soil. My eyes adjusted to the gloom slowly. The only light came from the single dirty window high up on the side, letting in a murky smear of the fog outside. On the floor, in the middle of the shed, lay Mrs. Ellis. She was on her side, knees slightly bent, one hand curled near her chest, the other stretched out as if reaching for something. A dark pool spread under the back of her head, seeping into the packed dirt. Her gray hair, usually pinned back neatly, was matted and sticky. Near her feet, almost touching her shoe, lay a hammer, its metal head turned toward me, a smear of red glistening around the claw. I did not move at first. My mind refused to connect the quiet, slightly nosy woman from next door with this still form on the floor. My throat tightened. I tried to call her name, but no sound came. My fingers tingled, and the edges of my vision went dim for a second. Then something clicked inside me, and I stumbled backward out of the shed. My shoulder hit the doorframe. The night air felt suddenly colder. I grabbed the side of the shed to steady myself and forced myself to breathe. "Robert?" someone called faintly. It was Helen again, from our back door now. I think something's happened," I managed. "To Mrs. Ellis." She did not come closer. I do not blame her. I told her to go back inside and call an ambulance, then added, "No, call the police. Tell them it looks bad." One, N. I went through the house, hands shaking, and dialed the number from the phone in the hallway. My voice sounded flat and distant as I gave our address and explained what I had found. The operator asked me if I was sure she was dead. I said yes, though I had not checked. I could not bring myself to touch the body. When I hung up, I stood in the hallway, staring at the patterned wallpaper, listening to the silence between the ticks of the clock. It felt like standing in a church after the service, after everyone had left. A thin layer of unreality coated everything. The police arrived faster than I expected. 2 uniformed constables first, then an older man in a plain suit and a younger one with sharp eyes and a narrow tie. They walked through the back, past my herb bed, and into the Ellis garden with the heavy, careful steps of people who know they are entering a place where something irreversible has happened. I watched from our kitchen window while Helen made tea we did not drink. The constables went into the shed, then came back out and spoke quietly with the detectives. One of them glanced toward our house and motioned. A few minutes later, the older detective knocked on our back door. He introduced himself as Detective Inspector Mallory. He had graying hair, a lined face, and the kind of tired politeness that told me he had seen too many scenes like the one in the shed. His partner, Detective Sergeant Clark, nodded but said little. They asked me to go through what had happened from the moment I arrived in the driveway. What did I hear, exactly? How long between the noise and my going out? Did I see anyone in the street? Any unfamiliar cars? I answered as best I could. The thud, the open gate, the partially lit window, the hammer on the floor. Every detail felt both too trivial and terribly important. I mentioned the light I had seen earlier in her house on other evenings when Peter came by. I told them about the nursing home and the fall, Mallory wrote in a small notebook. Clark watched my face more than he watched the notes. "Did Mrs. Ellis have any visitors recently?" Mallory asked. "Besides her son, not that I've seen," I said. "I work most days, but the house has been quiet. No cars, no deliveries, just Peter now and then." "Any trouble? Strange arguments? Did she ever mention being afraid of someone?" I shook my head. "She complained about the staff at the home when Peter moved her there. Said they were too slow with her tea. That's the worst I heard." Mallory gave a small, humorless smile. "That makes her like half the old ladies in Greater Manchester, Mr. Hayes." As they turned to leave, I thought of something. It was small, but it nagged. "Her handbag," I said. "In the shed, on the workbench, near the wall. It was open." Mallory paused. "You noticed that?" I saw her purse inside, the wallet, or what looked like it. I didn't touch it. He nodded slowly. "All right. Thank you. We'll have another chat tomorrow, I expect." Later that night, after they had taken the body away and taped off the garden shed, I was left with the image of that opened handbag. If this had been a robbery gone wrong, you would expect the bag to be empty, the contents scattered, drawers turned out. But the wallet had still been there. Even from where I stood in the doorway, I could see the edge of notes. It sat in my mind like a small stone dropped into still water, sending out ripples that touched everything else. The next morning, the newspapers called it a tragic accident. There was a thin column buried on the third page of the local paper. Elderly woman dies in garden fall. The article mentioned her age, the previous hip fracture, and her stay at the nursing home. It stated that she had probably slipped while reaching for something. There was no mention of the hammer. At breakfast, Helen read the piece and exhaled softly. "Poor woman," she said. "At least she didn't lie in there for days. Imagine if you hadn't heard anything." I stared at my toast without tasting it. "I'm not sure I heard the fall itself," I said. "It might have been something else." "What else could it be?" she replied. "Fog makes everything sound strange." She was right, in a way. Fog distorts things. It blurs lines, muffles edges, makes you misjudge distances. Maybe I had heard a bin lid after all. Maybe the timing was a coincidence. But the unease did not fade. I spent the day at work adding up columns of figures that did not register in my mind. My pencil left smudges where it hovered too long over the paper. At lunch, my colleague Alan asked if I was all right. I told him what had happened. He listened with the mild interest of someone who has not yet had death step into his street. "Old people fall," he said, stirring sugar into his tea. "My Nan went that way. She tripped on the stairs and that was it. Better than a long illness, they say." "Yes," I replied, though it did not feel like the kind of death you would choose if you had options. My mind kept returning to the position of her body, to the angle of the hammer, to the open handbag on the bench. When I came home that evening, a car I did not recognize was parked outside the Ellis house, a dark blue Rover, a bit newer than most on our street. As I walked up the path, the front door opened, and a man stepped out, closing it behind him with deliberate care. He was in his late 30s, tall and lean, with a suit that had known better days. His dark hair was thinning at the temples. He held a small suitcase in one hand and a folder under his arm. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his movements were controlled, almost stiff. "Mr. Hayes?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Peter Ellis. We spoke briefly months ago when I moved my mother to the home." He shifted the suitcase. "I wanted to thank you for finding her, for calling the police." There was an awkward pause. I invited him into our kitchen for a cup of tea. It is what people do in such situations, even when they have no idea what to say. He sat at the table, fingers wrapped around the mug Helen placed in front of him, though he barely drank. Up close, he looked exhausted, his skin pale under the faint stubble on his jaw. His tie hung loose, the knot pulled down, as if he had given up on formality halfway through the day. "They say it was an accident," he began. "She always loved pottering about in that garden. We told her to stop after the hip, but she wouldn't listen. Stubborn woman." "Did you know she was back at the house?" I asked. "I thought she was still at the home." He nodded, eyes dropping to the table. "She insisted, begged me, said she couldn't stand the smell there. Disinfectant and boiled cabbage, she called it. I talked to her doctor, to the staff. They said it wasn't wise, but I gave in. Brought her here on Friday. Planned to stay for a couple of days, see how she managed. Then I had to go back to London for work. I left Monday morning. She seemed fine." "Did she have anyone checking on her?" I asked. "A neighbor, Mrs. Grant, said she'd look in. Nurse from the home promised to drop by." He shrugged. "I should have stayed. I thought she'd be all right. She always landed on her feet." For a moment, his control slipped and his voice cracked. He pressed his lips together, swallowed, and then continued. "She was a difficult woman, Mr. Hayes. Strong-willed, secretive. But she was my mother. I didn't want her last months to be miserable. Now." He stopped, staring into the middle distance, his fingers tightening around the mug. "I'm sorry," I said. It sounded inadequate, as such phrases always do. He nodded once. "Did you see anything unusual when you found her?" I hesitated. Her handbag was in the shed. "Open." Her wallet looked untouched. He looked up sharply. "Untouched? Yes, he frowned. She kept some cash for groceries, but not much. There's nothing worth stealing in that house now. I've cleared out most of it. Maybe she brought the bag with her so she could pay delivery if someone brought something. Maybe, I said. But the question was now in both of our minds, hanging there. I also mentioned the hammer, trying to keep my voice neutral. She was near a hammer. On the floor. She had a few old tools in there, he answered quickly. Dad used to fix things himself. She never threw anything away. She probably went in to look at something on a shelf, lost her balance, hit her head. That's what they told me. That's what the paper said too, I answered. He rubbed his forehead. She shouldn't have been alone. I'll have to live with that. We spoke for a while longer, about arrangements, about the funeral. He mentioned a brother of hers, an Uncle Frank, who lived somewhere in Salford. He'll show up, I suppose, Peter said. If there's a chance for money, he always does. Money? I asked. You know how it is. He always believed my mother cheated him over their parents' house. Some old grievance from before I was born. He came asking for loans over the years. She helped him sometimes. God knows why. She always felt guilty about something. He did not elaborate on what that something was. I did not push yet. There is a point where curiosity turns into intrusion, and we were not there. After he left, the house felt smaller. The fog outside had thickened again, pressing against the windows. I stood at the sink, looking out over the gardens, trying to picture the last moments of Mrs. Ellis. Had she gone out to the shed on unsteady legs, perhaps to fetch something sentimental she could not bear to leave behind? Had she reached for a shelf and slipped? Or had someone been there with her? I told myself to leave it alone. The police had seen the scene up close, and they knew what to look for. I was just an accountant who had read too many library crime novels. But when I went to bed, sleep hovered out of reach. Every time I drifted close, I heard that heavy, dull thud again in my mind, and the image of the hammer beside her head snapped me awake. On Saturday morning, I did the thing you are not supposed to do. I trespassed. Helen had gone to the shops with our daughter. Our son was at a football match. The house was quiet. I stood at the back door with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand and looked at the strip of police tape still hanging loosely across the Ellis Garden gate. The door to the shed was closed now. The detectives had been and gone. They had decided, officially, that it was an accident. It should have been enough. I put the mug down, put on my coat, and stepped into the chill air. The fog was thinner than the previous days, shredding into low strands that clung to the shrubs. I approached the gate and ducked under the tape, feeling foolish and a little dishonest, like a schoolboy sneaking into an empty classroom. Up close, the Ellis Garden looked more neglected than I had realized. The grass was damp and long, flattened in places by footprints. The flower beds were mostly bare, with only a few stubborn plants clinging on. A broken rake lay near the fence. The back step had a small crack in it that I had never noticed. I went straight to the shed. The padlock hung open, chain looped through but not fastened. My stomach tightened. Someone had not bothered to secure it after the police left, or they had left it that way deliberately. I hesitated for a second, listening for any sounds from the neighboring houses. A distant lawnmower coughed to life somewhere down the street. No one was watching. I pulled the door open. The smell of damp and soil rolled out, mixed now with a faint chemical tang, probably from whatever the police had used to clean or mark the bloodstain. The patch of earth where she had lain was darker than the rest, a wide, irregular stain. The hammer was gone. I stepped inside, careful where I put my feet. The shed was small shelves along one wall, an old workbench under the window, a few hooks for tools on the other side, mostly empty now. Spiderwebs hung like gray lace in the corners. Dust motes floated in the thin strip of light. The handbag was still on the bench. That surprised me. I had expected the police to take it as evidence. It sat where I remembered, slightly collapsed, the zip half open. Next to it lay a pair of gardening gloves and a cracked pot. I glanced inside the bag. The wallet was there, brown leather, snapped shut. A folded handkerchief, a lipstick, a small notepad with the name of the nursing home printed on the cover. Nothing remarkable, nothing that shouted motive. I put the bag down exactly as it had been and turned away. That was when I saw the corner of paper peeking out from under a plastic potting tray on the floor near the back wall. It might have been nothing, an old seed packet, a grocery list. I do not know why I picked it up. Maybe because once you step over a line, it becomes easier to step a little further. I lifted the tray and retrieved the paper. It was a folded letter, yellowed at the edges, creased from handling. The writing on the outside was faint but legible. To Margaret. I unfolded it. The handwriting inside was shaky, as if written by someone with a tremor or an old person. It did not look like Mrs. Ellis's neat script from the Christmas cards. The date at the top was smudged, but seemed to say, July 1976. Dear Margaret, it began, I cannot keep covering for you. The money is gone. You promised to set things right after the will, but you never did. I am tired of waiting. You made me sign those papers. Told me it was only temporary. You know that is not true. You know what you did. Meet me, and we settle this, one way or another. Frank. My first thought was that Frank must be her brother, the uncle Peter had mentioned. My second thought was that the letter was 2 years old and should not matter now. But the words, you know what you did, and the money is gone, gripped me. I folded the letter and slid it into my coat pocket without thinking too long about the ethics of what I was doing. Then I continued to look around. On a high shelf at the back, half hidden behind a cracked watering can, was a small tin box, the kind people used to keep tobacco or sewing supplies in. It was dented and had a simple clasp. Curiosity pushed me again. I took it down. It was locked, but the metal was thin and old. I slipped it under my arm and left the shed, closing the door carefully behind me, making sure it looked as undisturbed as possible. Back in my own kitchen, I found a flat screwdriver in the drawer and worked the tip into the lid until the clasp bent and gave way with a soft snap. I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, old, faded, some black and white, some color. The first few were familiar in tone, young Margaret in a floral dress, standing beside a man in an army uniform. The same couple on a beach somewhere, wind whipping their hair. A modest wedding photo. I flipped through them with a sense of trespassing not just on property, but on memory. Then I reached a small stack of newer color prints, glossy and less faded. One showed Margaret in the early 70s, judging by the clothes and decor. She looked older, in her 60s, sitting in an armchair in a living room I vaguely recognized as hers from a glance through her front window. On her lap was a baby, wrapped in a white blanket. Beside her stood a man in a dark suit, holding the baby's tiny hand. He was not Peter. He was younger, with longer hair and sideburns, in the fashion of that decade. On the back of the photo, in neat writing, were the words, 1972, our secret. The phrase made the hairs on my arms rise. Our secret. I looked at the baby's face. It was impossible to tell much at that age, only that it was very small, its eyes closed, its mouth slightly open. The man's face was clearer, and I knew with a quiet jolt that I had never seen him before on our street. I flipped through the rest. 2 more photographs showed the same child, a little older, maybe a few months. In one, the man held the baby in front of the Ellis house, near the front door. In the other, Margaret stood alone in the garden, the child on her hip, looking directly at the camera with a guarded expression. There were no other notes on the backs, no name, No further date. I put the photos down on the table and stared at them. I remembered Peter's age. He was in his late 30s, which meant he had been born in the early 40s, near the end of the war. This baby was clearly from the 70s. A late child? A grandchild? But whose? And why would Margaret label it our secret? The tin box held nothing else besides a few old receipts and a dried, pressed flower. I sat there, the letter from Frank in my pocket, the photos on the table, feeling as if I had stepped into a story that was not mine. There was a temptation to close the box, put everything back in the shed, and pretend I had seen nothing. That would have been the wise thing to do. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Peter Ellis at the number he had given me the day before. "Peter, it's Robert Hayes," I said when he answered. His voice was flat, as if he had not slept. There was city noise in the background. "Mr. Hayes, is something wrong?" "I went into your mother's shed," I said. "I know I shouldn't have, but the door was open. I found something that might matter. A letter. From your Uncle Frank, I think." There was a pause. "What kind of letter?" "A threatening one, from 2 years ago. He mentions money, the will, and says he's tired of covering for her." I heard a breath, then a muttered word that did not sound polite. "Can I come by?" he asked. "Yes, of course." He arrived less than 2 hours later, the rover pulling into the same spot as before. He looked worse than yesterday. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt creased, his tie missing. His movements held a jittery energy now, like a man who had drunk too much coffee and not enough water. We sat again at my kitchen table. I placed the folded letter on the table between us. He read it slowly, lips moving slightly, then read it again. "I knew they had some row about the house," he said at last, "but I didn't know there was a letter. She never mentioned it to me." "Did Frank ever talk about covering for her?" I asked. "He talked about how she cheated him," he said bitterly. "According to his version, she had our grandparents' will changed so she would get the house, then made him sign something he didn't understand so he'd lose his share. He's told that story to anyone who would listen for the last 20 years. Truth is, he drank most of his opportunities away. He never forgave her for having a bit more sense." He turned the letter over in his hands. "Still, this," he tapped the paper. "It's ugly, but it's old, 2 years old. Doesn't prove anything about what happened this week." "I know," I said. "There's something else. I found a tin box. In the shed. It had photos." He looked up sharply. "What kind of photos?" I brought the box from the living room, where I had hidden it like contraband, and placed it on the table. His fingers were quicker and less careful than mine as he flipped through the images. When he reached the ones of the baby, his jaw tightened. "She never showed me these," he said softly. "Do you know who the child is?" I asked. He looked at the photo of Margaret with the baby and the unknown man. "No, I've never seen this man." The date, 1972. I was already at university then. I was barely home. She wrote that it was our secret. He flipped the photo over again. "Yes, typical. She loved secrets. Could it be family?" I asked. "A relative's child, possibly," he said, though he did not sound convinced. "But why label it that way?" He looked at me. "Did you show these to the police?" "No," I admitted. I wasn't sure if they were relevant. His gaze lingered on the photos, then on the letter. "I wish you had said nothing," he said quietly. "Part of me just wants to bury her and leave everything under the earth with her. But it seems she won't allow that even in death." He closed the box. "I need to speak to Frank." "Do you know where he lives?" I asked. "In Salford, a small flat above a betting shop. I've been there once. It's not a place you'd visit by choice." He looked up. "Would you come with me? I'd rather not go alone. He'll be on his best behavior with a stranger there." I hesitated. It was not my family. It was not my business. But part of me was already committed. The moment I stepped under that police tape, I had started down a path. Turning back now would only leave me with half-formed questions that would grow poisonous over time. "All right," I said. "I'll come." We drove to Salford that afternoon in his Rover, the city getting grimmer as we left the quieter suburbs. Rows of terraced houses pressed close to the street, laundry strung across tiny yards, kids kicking a ball against a wall with chalked goalposts. We parked near a row of shops with peeling paint, a chip shop, a laundrette, the bedding shop Peter had mentioned, and above them a set of narrow, grimy windows. The staircase to the flats smelled of stale beer, fried food, and cigarettes. At the top, a thin corridor led to a door with flaking paint and a dent near the bottom where someone had once kicked it hard. Peter knocked. For a moment, there was nothing. Then heavy footsteps approached, and the door opened. Frank Ellis looked older than I expected. Around 65, with thinning gray hair combed back stubbornly, a rough, unshaven face, and eyes that were both bloodshot and sharp. He wore a stained vest and trousers that had seen better decades. The air that drifted out of the flat was thick with smoke. "Peter," he said, "thought you'd be too busy counting your inheritance to visit." His gaze slid to me. "And who's this, then? Your solicitor?" "A neighbor," Peter said tersely. "Robert Hayes. He found Mum." "Can we come in?" Frank snorted. "Why not? It's not like I've got company lined up." He let us in. The flat was small, one main room with a sagging sofa, a table with an ashtray overflowing with butts, and a television in the corner showing horse racing with the sound off. The curtains were half drawn, though it was still daylight outside. We sat at the table. Frank remained standing, leaning against the counter, lighting another cigarette with the last ember of the previous one. "You heard she's dead," Peter said. "I heard," Frank answered. "Word travels fast when a house is about to come on the market." "She fell in the shed," Peter said. "The police say it was an accident." Frank took a drag. "Old people fall. It happens." Peter took the letter out of his pocket and slid it across the table. "Didn't expect to find this," he said. Frank glanced at it, then picked it up. His eyes moved over the words. His face hardened. "I wrote that," he said, "and I meant every word." He put the letter down. "She cheated me. Our own mom and dad died, and she twisted everything so she could live in that house while I lived here like this. I waited for her to do the right thing. She never did." "You talk about covering for her," I said quietly. "Covering what, exactly?" He looked at me as if noticing me properly for the first time. "You really are a nosy neighbor, aren't you?" he said. "Robert has been helping," Peter said. "He found some things at the house." Frank gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course he did. People always find things when there's death and property involved." "What did you mean? You made me sign those papers?" I pushed gently, nodding toward the letter. "What papers?" Frank stared at the ashtray for a long moment, then shrugged. "The will, the deeds, some legal rubbish. I'm no lawyer. She told me our parents wanted her to have the house because she looked after them. I was away working then. She said she'd square me later, give me my share when she sold or when I needed it. I trusted her. She waved papers in front of me, said sign here. It's just a formality for the solicitor. I signed. Years later, I found out it meant I had nothing." "That was in the 50s, Peter said. "You knew about it by the time I was a child." Frank sneered. "And you think I forgot? You think I forgave her? Your mother built her life on that house, and I built mine on whatever jobs I could find after they closed the yards. She never once admitted she'd done wrong. She said it was practical. That's what she called it. Practical." "What about the letter?" I asked. "You threatened to settle this one way or another." He shrugged again. "Words. I was drunk when I wrote that. I was drunk a lot back then. Doesn't mean I went and bashed her head in, if that's what you're wondering, Mr. Neighbor." His eyes met mine. There was a spark there, a mix of resentment and amusement. "Did you see her recently?" Peter asked. "In the days before she died?" Frank tapped ash into the tray. "Came by on Saturday morning. She was at home then. You'd brought her back. Didn't tell me, of course. I heard from a friend who lives near the home that she wasn't in her room there. So I came over, knocked, walked right in. She was in the kitchen, making tea like nothing had happened. I told her this was the time. She was getting old. She couldn't take her secrets with her. She told me to get out. Mrs. Grant saw you," I said. "She mentioned hearing raised voices in the Ellis house." He glanced at me. "Nosy and chatty, your street. What did you argue about?" Peter asked, jaw tight. "The same thing we always argued about," Frank said. "The house, the money, the way she went to the solicitor behind my back. I told her if she didn't make it right, I'd tell you everything. I'd tell the whole bloody street. She said I wouldn't dare, that I'd look like a fool." His lips pressed into a thin line. "She was right about that, at least." "And then?" I asked. "And then I left, slammed the door, went to the pub, spent what little I had on beer and the dogs. I didn't go back. Next thing I hear, she's dead in the shed. Karma, some would say." He shrugged again, but there was a flicker of something uneasy in his eyes. "Did you ever see a baby at her house in the early 70s? I asked suddenly. Frank stiffened. Peter shot me a glance, but said nothing. "A baby?" Frank repeated slowly. "Yes," I said. "Photos. Her with a baby, and a man who isn't Peter's father, from 1972. He was silent for a long time. The noise from the televised horse race filled the gap. Then he stubbed out his cigarette with unnecessary force. "This isn't your business," he said. "Either of you. The old bat is dead. Let her secrets rot with her." "Was it your child?" Peter asked quietly. His voice had a tremor in it. Frank let out a bark of laughter. "No. Christ, no. Do I look like someone who could keep a baby a secret for more than a week? It was hers, or at least she thought of it that way. But if you want to know more, ask her." He spread his hands. "Oh, that's right. You can't." He walked to the door and opened it. The conversation was over. "Get out, both of you. Go squabble over your precious house. Leave me with my losing bets. That's all I've got left." We left, the smell of stale smoke clinging to our clothes. On the drive back, Peter stared out of the passenger window, his face drawn. "Do you think he could have killed her?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "He's angry enough. But he's also lazy. The idea of him making the effort to commit murder seems almost too much. Still, that letter, the fight, the timing. What about the baby?" I asked. He closed his eyes briefly. "I don't know," he said. "But I intend to find out." So did I, though I would not have admitted it aloud then. What had begun as a horrible accident in a foggy garden had opened up into something else, an old grievance, a hidden child, a family that had more cracks than I had noticed from across the fence. Over the next few days, the official machinery moved faster than my thoughts. The coroner scheduled an inquest for the end of the week. The police, satisfied on the surface, did not press hard. The newspaper lost interest after the first small article. To the outside world, Margaret Ellis was just another old woman who had fallen in an unremarkable shed on an unremarkable street. Inside my head, however, the street had become anything but unremarkable. On Monday evening, I drove to the nursing home where Mrs. Ellis had been staying before Peter brought her back. It was a squat, square building of pale brick, surrounded by a patch of lawn with 2 struggling trees and a bench. A sign out front announced its name in polite cursive letters, as if it were a hotel rather than a place where people waited to become statistics. The reception area smelled of disinfectant and cabbage, just as Peter had said. A television murmured in the corner, showing a quiz show. A few residents sat in armchairs, staring at the screen with varying degrees of attention. A woman at the desk looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm a neighbor of Margaret Ellis," I said. "I heard she died. I wanted to ask a few questions, if that's all right." Her expression softened into the professional sympathy of someone used to dealing with relatives and friends after bad news. "Of course. I'm sorry for your loss." I did not correct her assumption that my loss was personal. It made things easier. She introduced herself as Valerie, the administrator, and led me to a small office off the corridor. "You were close to Mrs. Ellis?" she asked. "We were neighbors for many years," I said. "Not close, exactly, but we saw each other often. I wanted to understand how she ended up back at her house. I thought she was staying here permanently." Valerie nodded. "That was the plan. But Mrs. Ellis was determined. She did not like the routine here, said it made her feel like she was in boarding school again. She had some mobility issues after her hip, but her mind was sharp. Her son visited her regularly. They spoke about going home often. "When did she leave?" I asked. Valerie checked a file. "She signed herself out on Friday afternoon. Against our advice, I might add. We're not a prison, Mr. Hayes. If a resident is mentally competent, we cannot keep them here against their will." Her son was present, and he assured us he would stay with her for a few days to see how she managed. "Did anyone visit her there before she left?" I asked. "Family? Friends?" "A nurse said her brother came once," Valerie said. "Caused a bit of a scene at reception, shouting about money. We had to ask him to calm down or leave. That was a few months ago." "That would be Frank," I said. "Yes, that was the name." She frowned slightly. "If you don't mind me asking, why the questions? Have the police said anything?" "They believe it was an accident," I said. "I'm just trying to understand the days leading up to it." "Iserd," she hesitated, then lowered her voice. "To be honest, I was surprised when I heard she'd fallen. She wasn't that frail. Stubborn, yes. A bit unsteady, but she used her stick well. She could get around. She was more likely to hit someone with that stick than trip on it." "Did she ever seem frightened?" I asked. "Worried someone might come after her?" Valerie thought. "She mentioned arguments with her brother," she said. "Said he would never forgive her, no matter what she did. But she never said she felt in danger. She called him a toothless dog all bark." Her exact words. A young nurse passed the office, then stepped back when she saw Valerie. "Sorry," she said. "Did you want me to bring the files for Mrs. Ellis?" Valerie waved her in. "This is Claire," she said to me. She was one of the nurses who looked after Mrs. Ellis. Claire was in her 20s, with tired eyes and a bun that was already coming loose, even though it was barely evening. She smiled, then glanced at me curiously. "Mr. Hayes is a neighbor," Valerie explained. "He's asking about Mrs. Ellis." "I remember him," Claire said. She mentioned her neighbor who always kept his lawn neat. She sat down when Valerie gestured. She liked to talk about the street, said it was her kingdom. "Do you remember the day she left?" I asked. Claire nodded. Very clearly. She had been pestering us for days about going home. Friday morning, she was in a mood. Said, "Today's the day, Claire. I'm escaping." I told her she had to talk to the doctor. She said she'd already talked to Peter and that he would come in the afternoon. "Oh, I'm in over 7 on the skate. Did he?" I asked. "Yes, Friday, around 3. He signed the discharge papers. They argued a bit in her room. She wanted to leave with just a small bag. He wanted to take more. She won, of course." "How did they leave?" I asked. "Did he drive her?" Claire hesitated. "A taxi came," she said. "I remember because we joked about how it was like she was going on holiday. She put on her best coat. Peter went down first to pay at reception. Then the porter wheeled her out. She waved to us like royalty." "A taxi?" I repeated. "Not his car?" She nodded. "I didn't see his car. He said something about his being in the garage. He paid cash to the driver out front. "Do you remember the taxi company?" I asked. "Or the car?" She frowned. It wasn't one of the usual local firms. The logo on the door was different. The driver was younger, dark hair. The car was a dark saloon. I didn't pay much attention. We had a medication round starting. "Did the police ask you about this?" I asked. "They asked when she left and how," Claire said. "I told them. They wrote it down. I assumed they checked with the son." "Thank you," I said. "You've been very helpful." On the drive home, the detail of the taxi nagged at me. Peter had said he brought her home in his own car, that he had stayed for the weekend and then left Monday morning. Why mention one vehicle and use another? It might have been a simple lie, born of stress and grief, or it might not. The next day, I visited Mrs. Grant, the neighbor on the other side of the Ellis house. She was a widow in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a fondness for details that did not concern her. She opened the door before I even rang, as if she had been waiting for someone to ask. "I wondered when you'd come over," she said. "You were the one who found her, weren't you?" "Yes," I said. "I wanted to ask what you saw in the days before it happened." She ushered me into her small sitting room, where the curtains were drawn just enough to let in light but keep out anything that might be interesting for others to see. We sat on a sofa that smelt faintly of lavender and dust. "It's a terrible thing," she began. "I always said she should not have gone back home. She was too old to be climbing around that garden. My Arthur stopped mowing the lawn when he turned 70, and that was that." "Did you know she was back?" I asked. "Oh, yes. I saw her through the kitchen window on Saturday morning. She waved with that stick of hers. I waved back. Later, I heard raised voices. A man. I recognized it. 'Frank,' I said. She nodded eagerly. 'Her brother. He's been coming and going for years when he wants something.' They argued. I heard, 'You owe me, and you'll get nothing.' That sort of thing. Then the door slammed. I looked out and saw him storming off down the path. Red in the face, he was. 'Any other visitors?' I asked. Her son was there Friday. He arrived in the afternoon in a nice car. Not the one he usually drives, though. I noticed those things. Different number plate. Darker. Business car, maybe. He brought her in. She looked happy as anything. 'Did he stay?' I asked. 'Not the whole time,' she said. 'I saw him leave Sunday afternoon with a suitcase. She was at the window, watching. She always watched everyone. Never missed a trick. That one.' 'And Monday?' I asked. 'Tuesday?' 'Quiet,' she said. 'Too quiet, in hindsight. I thought she was resting. I didn't see the nurse, though she said she'd come. Then Tuesday night, I heard someone in the shared passage behind the houses. Gate creaked. Then you shouted. Then all the police came.' Her version of events added a layer of unease on top of the one from the nursing home. Peter had used a taxi to take his mother home, but had arrived in a different car than usual at the house. He had left before her death sometime Monday night or Tuesday. Frank had been there on Saturday, arguing. A nurse who was supposed to visit on Monday had not appeared, according to Mrs. Grant. People were moving in and out of that house in those last days as if it were the center of a small storm, and at the eye of it all was an old woman with a tin box of secrets under her floorboards and a hammer in her shed. By Thursday, the inquest loomed. The weather had not improved. Fog still clung to the city in the mornings, lifting only reluctantly by midday. It felt as if the world outside mirrored the state of things in my head. Peter called that morning. 'The coroner's office wants you there,' he said. 'As the one who found her.' 'Of course,' I said. 'Will you be speaking?' 'They want a statement from me too,' he replied. 'I'll be sticking to the accident story. It's what everyone seems to want.' His tone bothered me. It was too resigned, too rehearsed. Before the inquest, I took a small detour. I visited an old acquaintance, a retired police sergeant named Wilkins, who lived a few streets away. He had been the local sergeant when we first moved into the neighborhood. Years of dealing with petty crime and domestic squabbles had given him a practical, unromantic perspective on human behavior. He made me tea in a chipped mug and listened as I laid out what I knew. The letter from Frank, the photos in the tin box, the taxi from the home, the argument observed by Mrs. Grant, the inconsistencies in Peter's story. "You've done more nosing around in a week than some young detectives I used to know," he said with a hint of amusement. "You ever thought of changing jobs?" "I barely manage mine," I said. "This has just got under my skin." He sipped his tea. "Most deaths are exactly what they look like," he said. "Messy, inconvenient, but straightforward. Old lady with a history of falls goes down in a shed with tools lying about? 9 times out of 10, that's all it is. But people are funny creatures. Put a bit of money and guilt into the mix, add a secret or two, and that 10th case can look very similar at first. "Do you think I should go to the police with what I know?" I asked. "You already have, in part," he said. "You told them about the handbag. Now you've got more. The question is, what do you think happened?" I paused. I had avoided putting it into a simple sentence until then. "I think someone might have helped her fall, or helped her stay down," I said slowly. "Or at least, I think someone put their own interests ahead of her safety in a way that pushed her toward that floor." "Fancy way of accusing someone of manslaughter," he said. "Who? I don't know," I admitted. "Frank has motive. Old resentment, money, anger about the will. Peter has motive financial trouble, maybe pressure to inherit. Both were in and out of the house in those last days. Both have lied, in small ways." "What lies?" he asked. "Peter told me he drove her home himself," I said. "But a nurse saw them leave in a taxi. Mrs. Grant saw him arrive at the house in a different car than usual. He told the police he stayed till Monday, but there's a gap between when he left and when she was found where no one can place him. Frank pretends his threats were just empty words, but he also avoids talking about the baby in the photos, and neither of them has asked me for the tin box," I added. "That last part's interesting," Wilkins said. "Either they don't know it exists, or they don't care. People like that usually care about anything to do with inheritance and secrets." "Should I hand it over?" I asked. He nodded. "Bring it to Mallory. Tell him everything. If it's nothing, he'll tell you so and that'll be that. If it's something better, it's in their hands than in yours. You don't want to sit on evidence and then have it come out later." "I was planning to go to the inquest first," I said. "Do the inquest," he said. "Then speak to him in the corridor. He'll probably be there." The inquest was held in a small room at the council building, with worn wooden chairs and a smell of old files. The coroner sat at the front, flanked by a clerk who looked younger than some of the paper stacks on his desk. A few people sat on the benches. Myself, Peter, a representative from the nursing home, and, to my slight surprise, Frank. He wore a stained suit that did not fit properly and smelled faintly of spirits even from a few seats away. The proceedings were dry. They went over the medical details first. A pathologist described the fracture at the back of Mrs. Ellis's skull, the pattern of the injury, and the bruises on her arms and hips from previous falls. He concluded that the cause of death was cranial trauma due to impact with a hard surface, consistent with a fall. The police report was summarized. No signs of forced entry into the house. No evidence of struggle in the shed. Valuables untouched. Families stating there were no known enemies or serious disputes. The nursing home representative confirmed that Mrs. Ellis had been discharged at her own insistence, judged mentally competent, though physically frail. Then they called me. I answered the same questions I had answered for Detective Inspector Mallory that first night, about the thud, the fog, the gate, the body on the shed floor, the hammer. "Did you move anything at the scene, Mr. Hayes?" the coroner asked. "No," I said. "I did not touch her. I did not touch the hammer or her handbag. Did you see any other person near the shed Or in the garden at that time? No, I said. The gardens were quiet. The street was quiet. Peter was called next. He spoke in a flat, careful voice. He described his decision to bring his mother back, her happiness at returning to her own home, his staying with her for a few days. He said he left on Monday morning, after making sure she had food and a list of numbers to call. He did not mention the taxi, and no one asked. Frank was called last. He admitted to arguing with his sister on Saturday about old money issues. He denied touching her or going near the shed on any day. He said he had not visited her since that argument. His answers were short, almost defiant. The coroner conferred quietly with his clerk, then delivered his verdict. Accidental death due to fall while alone in garden shed. He expressed sympathy for the family and suggested that perhaps the case might act as a reminder of the risks of elderly people living alone. The formal, tidy words swept the messiness of her last days into a neat conclusion. As people stood to leave, I spotted Detective Inspector Mallory near the door. He had been sitting quietly in the back for most of the inquest, making few notes. I walked over to him, tin box wrapped in a plain paper bag under my arm. "Inspector," I said, "there's something I didn't mention in my statement." He raised an eyebrow. "That's not usually a sentence I like hearing after an inquest," he said. His tone was dry, but his eyes were alert. "I didn't think it was relevant at first," I said. "Then I found more. A letter, some photographs. I spoke to the nursing home. There are inconsistencies in the stories." I told him, briefly, but as clearly as I could, about the letter from Frank, the phrase, "covering for you," the secret baby photos from 1972, the taxi Claire had mentioned, the different car misses. Grant had noticed the argument on Saturday, and the lies of omission in Peter's testimony. He listened without interrupting, his face giving nothing away. When I finished, I handed him the tin box. "You held on to this for how long?" he asked. 4 days, I admitted. "I wasn't sure what to do with it." "You're not the only one who hesitates when stepping into other people's secrets," he said. "All right, we'll have a look. Don't expect fireworks. This might still be nothing more than a sad fall in a poorly kept shed." "I understand," I said. "But," he added, tucking the box under his arm, "since you've spent so much time thinking about this, let me ask you something. What do you think is the worst thing that could be hidden in there?" "In the box?" I asked. "In the whole situation," he said. "A child that no one acknowledges," I said slowly, "and a debt that goes beyond money." He nodded once, as if that matched his own list. "Go home, Mr. Hayes. Try to get some sleep. Let us carry this one for a while." I did go home. I did not sleep much better. Once you begin to see the people on your street as capable of more than their daily routines suggest, it is hard to unsee it. A week passed. Life resumed its ordinary patterns on the surface. I went back to the office, completed tax returns for clients I'd never met in person, and listened to Alan complain about his wife's new curtains. Helen made casseroles and talked about Christmas shopping. The children argued over the television. The fog lifted, and the days grew colder and clearer. Yet every time I looked out of the back window, I saw the Ellis garden, the shed, and, in my mind, the dark stain on the floor. The house itself remained shuttered. Peter had returned to London. Frank did not come by, or at least not at times when I was watching. I did not hear from Mallory. I told myself that no news probably meant there was nothing more to find. Still, curiosity and unease settled into me like an ache. On the second Friday after the inquest, I received a call at the office. The receptionist transferred it with a puzzled look. "Mr. Hayes?" A female voice, clear but a little strained. "Yes, it's Claire, from the nursing home." I sat up straighter. "Is something wrong?" "I don't know," she said. "The police came by yesterday. They asked more questions about the discharge, about the taxi, about the times. I told them what I told you. But they asked something else that didn't make sense. They wanted to know if Mrs. Ellis ever talked about a baby. A baby, I repeated. Yes, she did, actually. Once. Claire lowered her voice. She said she had a baby a long time ago that nobody knew about. I thought she was confused. It was late. She was tired. But she was adamant. She said, "They think Peter is the only one, but there was another. I did a terrible thing." Then she fell asleep in the chair. I meant to tell the doctor, but we were short-staffed, and it slipped my mind. It seemed like one of those things old people say. "Did you tell the police that?" I asked. "Yes. That's why I'm calling you. I shouldn't, I know. But I felt you should know they're looking at this more closely." "Thank you," I said, "for calling." After I hung up, it took me a few minutes to steady myself. The vague outline of a hidden child had been given sharper edges. Margaret had spoken of a baby herself. She had called it a terrible thing. The phrase carried weight. That evening, after dinner, I told Helen I was going for a walk and headed toward the bus stop. I did not take the car. The place I was going to felt like somewhere you arrived at on foot or by bus, not in the comfort of your own vehicle. Frank answered the door with a scowl when I knocked on his flat again. "You again," he said. "You must really have nothing better to do." "I want to talk about the baby," I said. His expression flickered. For a second, something like fear crossed his features. Then it hardened into irritation. "I told you last time. That's not your—" "The police are asking about it," I said. "They went to the nursing home. They know Margaret talked about a baby no one knew about. They've seen the photos in the tin box. You can keep telling me it's not my business if you like, but soon it will be everyone's business. You might as well choose how your part is told." He leaned against the door frame, rubbing his forehead. Behind him, the television cast blue light across the cluttered room. "You ever done something stupid when you were young, and then spent the rest of your life pretending it never happened?" he asked. "Everyone has," I said. "Some things are just bigger than others." He snorted. "In the war, she got pregnant," he said bluntly. "Not by my dad, by some soldier stationed nearby. Yank, I think. It was all hush-hush. Our parents shipped her off to some home for girls in trouble. She had the baby there, came back alone. They said the child had been adopted by a nice couple far away. She never spoke of it." "This was in the 40s, I said. "Yes." He took a drag on his cigarette. "Years later, she met your Mr. Ellis, married him, had Peter. Everyone pretended that first baby never existed, except she didn't forget. Guilt doesn't work like that." "Then what happened in 1972? I asked. "Who was the man in the photo?" He looked away. "She tracked down the first one," he said. "The baby she'd given up, or that had been taken from her, depending on which version you believe. He was a grown man then, married, with a child of his own. He wanted nothing to do with her at first. Then he came around, thought maybe there was money in it. I remembered the photograph of the unknown man holding the baby." "So the baby in the photo is her grandchild?" Frank said. "The child of her first son, not Peter. She kept it quiet, didn't tell anyone, met them in secret, gave them money, tried to make up for lost time. She always said she'd set up something in her will for that child, but she also told Peter he'd get everything. She wanted to have it both ways. That was her problem all her life, wanting two things that couldn't both be true." "Does Peter know about this?" I asked. "Not from me," Frank said. "I threatened to tell him when I was drunk, to scare her. But I never did. She might have told him herself recently. The police seemed to think so. They came here too. Asked me if I thought he knew. I told them I didn't." He gave a bitter smile. "Family loyalty, eh? Why didn't you say anything sooner?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because it's ugly. Because it doesn't change what she did to me with the house. Because it gives people more reason to feel sorry for her. Poor Margaret, losing a child, having to give it up. They forget all the times she lied. And also because she was my sister. You don't go airing that kind of thing to every stranger who happens by. How does this tie into her death? I asked. He sighed. Everything ties into everything. When you get to the end of a life, she told me, not long before she went to that home, that she'd written a new will. Said she'd left something for the lost branch, as she called it. She also said she wasn't sure she trusted Peter not to fight it. She wanted me to be some sort of witness. That's where that bloody letter came from. I told her I wouldn't sign anything until I saw what she was planning. We argued. She said she'd fix it. Then she went and fell in a shed. Convenient, if you ask me. Convenient for whom? I asked. Take your pick, he said. For Peter, who gets everything if that new will never shows up. For the unknown grandchild, if it does. For me, if she'd actually left me a proper share, which I doubt. For everyone tired of dealing with her complications, maybe even for herself. I left with more pieces but no clear picture. The story had gained depth, but the central image remained cloudy. A lost child, found again. A replacement child who might not have been told the truth. A will, possibly rewritten. Money spread thin across guilt and resentment. When I got home, there was a message from Detective Inspector Mallory on our answering machine. Mr. Hayes, this is Mallory. We need to talk. Please call when you get in. I called him back. He asked me to come to the station the next day. The police station was a low building of dark brick, functional and slightly oppressive. Inside, it smelled of paper, sweat, and cheap coffee. Mallory met me in a small interview room with a table, 4 chairs, and walls the color of old porridge. He placed a tin box on the table between us. It looked smaller in that room, surrounded by official forms and gray folders. We've gone through this, he said. The photos, the receipts. We traced the man in the pictures. He matches a record of a birth registered in 1944, a boy born to a Margaret Ellis. No father listed, adopted out. We also confirmed he died in a car accident in 1976, along with his wife. Their baby survived and is now with relatives in another county. So the grandchild is still alive, I said. Yes, he said. But as far as we can tell, Margaret never formalized anything for them in her will. We've obtained the last registered will from her solicitor. It leaves everything to Peter, with a small bequest to charity. No mention of Frank, no mention of any other descendants. What about the new will Frank mentioned? I asked. Mallory shrugged. If she wrote one, we haven't seen it. No solicitor has filed it. No copy was found at the house so far, unless she hid it very well. He leaned back. We've also looked into Peter a bit more. His business isn't doing well. He's in debt. He took out a life insurance policy on his mother last year. Nothing unusual there on its own. You'd be surprised how many people do that with elderly parents when they're helping with care costs. But there's a detail that bothers me. End quote. Allostat. What detail? I asked. The policy pays out more for accidental death than for natural causes, he said. Double, in fact. And he increased the amount 3 months ago. I swallowed. That could still be coincidence, I said. It could, he agreed. Or it could be foresight. It's hard to prove intention with a policy form. But when you add in the taxi, the conflicting stories about who drove her home, and the fact that he asked the nursing home to note her as independent in some records, so the insurer wouldn't see her as too high risk, it begins to smell. And Frank? I asked. Frank is a walking motive, Mallory said. He's also a man whose entire life has been a long, noisy complaint. But he doesn't strike me as someone who could stage things subtly. If he lost his temper and hit someone, we'd see signs of that. This, if there was interference, it feels quieter, more like neglect, shaped to look like bad luck. You think Peter might have let her fall? I asked. Mallory shook his head. We don't have evidence of that. What we do have is a timeline that could go two ways. According to Peter, he stayed until Monday morning, left her in reasonably good shape, and never saw her again. According to Mrs. Grant, she saw him leaving Sunday afternoon. That's a difference of almost a day. According to the nurse, a visiting carer was scheduled for Monday but never actually saw her. According to another neighbor, someone saw a man going into the Ellis house late Monday night, but they didn't pay attention to who. Could that someone have been Peter? I asked. It could, he said. His work records show he was back in London by Tuesday morning. That leaves Monday night as a gap. He says he was at a colleague's flat. The colleague confirms, but you know how these things go. People lie for friends. So what are you going to do? I asked. For now, nothing much more, he said honestly. The coroner's verdict stands unless new, solid evidence appears. We can't charge someone because their financial situation makes us uneasy and their story has a few smudges around the edges. Old houses are full of smudges. So are old families. I nodded, though frustration burned in my chest. So that's it? She becomes a line in a file marked closed? In the legal sense, yes, he said. In the moral sense, cases like this never fully close. They just settle into people's lives as weight. Peter will carry his weight. Frank will carry his. You, unfortunately, will carry some as well, because you decided to step into the middle of it. He gave me a small, tired smile. But you did the right thing. You brought us what you found. You didn't try to be a hero. You let us make the call. That's more than some do. On my way out of the station, I passed Peter in the corridor. He looked thinner than before, his suit hanging a little looser. He was waiting on a bench, staring at his hands. Robert, he said when he saw me. Are they charging me with something? No, I said. Not now. They just wanted to fill in some blanks. He laughed bitterly. There are too many blanks. That's the problem. She spent her entire life hiding things, and now I'm left with the shadows of them. Try as. Did she tell you about the first child? I asked quietly. About the son she had during the war? He nodded slowly. A few weeks before she went to the home, she sat at the kitchen table and told me the whole story, or her version of it. She cried more in that hour than I'd seen in 10 years. Said she'd tried to make it up by giving money to his family. Said she'd wanted to change her will, but kept putting it off because she was afraid. Afraid of lawyers, afraid of me, afraid of everything. Did she actually change it? I asked. He shook his head. She wrote something out by hand, a sort of letter saying what she wanted done. She asked me to witness it. I refused. I was angry. I told her she was trying to buy her way into heaven at the last minute. I said ugly things. That same night, I found the new life insurance policy in her drawer. It felt like she was turning her death into a transaction. I couldn't stand it. Where is that letter now? I asked. Gone, he said. I don't know if she hid it or destroyed it. I've searched the house twice. I haven't found it. Maybe she put it in some coat and it went out with the charity bags. You can't know. That's the thing. You never know what's missing after someone dies. You only know what you find. He looked at me, eyes raw. Do you think I killed her? He asked. It was a direct question. I had spent days circling it in my mind without saying it aloud. Now it hung between us, needing some answer. I think you had reasons to wish things were different, I said slowly. I think you made choices that weren't kind to her. But I don't know what happened in that shed. I wasn't there. Only 2 people know, and one of them is dead. He let out a long breath. Fair enough, he said. For what it's worth, I found her Monday afternoon. She had fallen. She was alive. Just barely. I panicked. I thought about calling an ambulance. Then I thought about the policy, about the way they'd ask questions about why she was home alone, about the costs. I hesitated. That's what I did. I hesitated. When I finally went back into the shed, she was gone. And then I tidied things, put the hammer near her, tried to make it look like she'd gone in alone later. That's my crime. The words came out flat, not like a confession in a courtroom, but like a man admitting to something he had already judged himself for. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're the one who found her," he said. "Because every time I picture that shed, I also picture you standing in the doorway. Because you asked questions. Because you might as well know the thing you've been circling around." "Have you told the police?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not like that. I told them I found her dead. I left out the part about her still breathing. They might push, they might not. Either way, they can't prove what was in my head." He gave a bitter smile. "What would they charge me with? Bad timing? Being a coward? Those aren't crimes in the statute book." "They might see it as neglect," I said. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe they'll see it as just another messy decision in a messy family. The law isn't built for feelings. It wants neat categories. This doesn't fit neatly anywhere." He stood up. "I'm going home," he said. "To London. I'll sell the house. I'll send some money quietly to that grandchild if I can track them down. It won't fix anything, but it will be something." He walked past me and out of the station. I stood there for a moment, feeling as if the air had thickened again, not with fog this time, but with the weight of what I had just heard. After that conversation, there were no dramatic arrests, no new headlines. The world did not care about Margaret Ellis and the way her son waited a little too long before calling for help. The law did not spin on its axis. Paperwork moved, perhaps, in some offices. Files were updated quietly, notes added, but there was no courtroom scene, no definitive answer stamped in red. The Ellis house stayed empty for months. A for sale sign appeared in the front garden eventually, leaning at a slight angle. Viewers came and went on Saturdays, peering at the rooms where secrets had been kept in tins and under floorboards. Some must have loved the idea of a garden and a shed. They saw a place for tomatoes and tools. They didn't see what had stained the floor. I saw too much. I wish I could say that I handled it all with equanimity, that I simply filed the experience away and moved on. The truth is, it changed the way I looked at people, at my own family, at the silent lives on our street. For a while, I found myself watching my neighbors more closely. Not in a sinister way, I hope, but with an awareness that what you see from the pavement is only ever the thinnest layer. The couple 3 houses down, who argued loudly once a month, might have deals with each other that no one else would understand. The old man who fed birds in his front garden might be carrying something heavier than birdseed. Helen noticed my distraction. One evening, as we washed dishes together, she said, "You've been somewhere else since Mrs. Ellis died. It's like you're in the room, but not in the same world." "I keep thinking about that shed," I said, "about those few minutes when he hesitated, how a life can hinge on a pause." She dried a plate slowly. "You always liked puzzles," she said, "but real life isn't a crossword. You don't get all the letters. Sometimes you never see the clue. You just live with the blank." "I know," I said, "but knowing it and accepting it are not the same thing." I did some quiet things that no one asked me to do. I contacted the solicitor Mallory had mentioned and asked if there was any way Margaret's undocumented wishes regarding her grandchild could be honored. The answer was mostly no. The law recognized only the formal will. But there were ways, I learned, for Peter to make private arrangements if he chose. I wrote a letter to Peter, not accusing, not absolving, simply laying out what I understood from our conversations and what I hoped he might do with what he had been left. I posted it and did not expect a reply. Months later, I received a short note in return. It was written in tight, controlled handwriting. "Robert, I have located the relatives who are raising my mother's grandchild. I have arranged for a sum to be set aside for them. It is not enough to make anything right, but it is a gesture I can live with. As for what happened in the shed, I will carry that alone. Thank you for forcing me to look at it honestly, even if that was never your intention. P. I folded the note and put it in a drawer with other papers I rarely looked at. It did not change the facts of that night, but it added a small, human coda. Frank drifted in and out of the street for a while after the funeral. I saw him once more, sitting on the low wall outside the Ellis house, smoking and staring at the windows. I walked over, unsure of why. "They'll sell it soon," he said without looking at me. "Then someone else will sleep in there, hang their curtains in the front room, plant their own rubbish in the garden. That's what houses are for," I said. "To be lived in." He snorted. "Houses are for holding ghosts," he said. "You think you're just storing furniture, but really you're storing all the things no one said out loud." He flicked ash onto the pavement. "They didn't charge him, did they?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not formally." He nodded, as if that matched his expectations. "Figures. The system has never been particularly interested in the likes of us unless we make a big enough mess." He stood up, joints cracking. "I'm going to move," he said. "Somewhere by the sea, maybe, where I can shout at the water instead of at walls." I don't know if he ever did. People often talk about leaving and then stay exactly where they are. That's another thing you learn when you watch life up close. The Ellis house eventually sold. The new owners were a couple about my age, with a small boy who liked to kick a ball into our garden by mistake. They repainted the exterior, fixed the cracked back step, and replaced the rotting shed with a new one from a catalog. The old shed, with its mottled wood and its ghosts, went to the tip in pieces. One Saturday, I watched from my kitchen window as the man carried out the last panel of the old shed. For a second, the spot where it had stood was empty, just a rectangle of bare, flattened earth. The boy ran around it, laughing, chasing the ball. Helen came up behind me and slipped an arm around my waist. "You look like someone at a funeral," she said. "In a way, I am," I replied. It would be easy to say that everything was fine after that, that the new shed, smelling of fresh wood and new nails, erased what had happened in the old one. Life does keep moving. New stories overlay old ones, but the mind is not a council worker sweeping leaves from a pavement. It holds on to some images whether you want it to or not. Whenever fog rolls down our street now, softening the edges of the lamps and swallowing the far end of the pavement, I am back in my car on that October evening. I hear the thud again. I walk through the gate. I open the shed door. Margaret Ellis lies on the floor, and somewhere not so far away, her son stands in a kitchen, weighing the cost of calling for help. I have told this story now as honestly as I can, not because I think it is extraordinary, but because it is ordinary in a way that frightens me. There was no mastermind, no brilliant villain, no dramatic confession in court. There were just ordinary, tired people making small, selfish decisions on top of old wounds and older secrets. That is the part that stays with me. The sense that the difference between accident and crime, between natural death and something darker, can sometimes be measured not in blows or weapons, but in the length of a hesitation, in the number of minutes a son waits before picking up the phone. I sometimes think about what would have happened if I had gone into the garden a few minutes earlier that night, if I had heard the first sound of her fall instead of something later. If I had stepped into that shed while she was still making small, frightened sounds, would she have lived? Would it have changed what Peter did or didn't do? Or would we all have simply found a different way to tell ourselves comfortable lies? There is no way to know. The past does not offer alternative versions. It gives you one line and lets you stare at it for as long as you like. So I do what people do. I mow my lawn, I go to work, I eat dinner with my family, I nod to the new neighbors and return the boy's ball when it lands in our garden. And on some evenings, when the light is low and the air is damp. I look toward the back fence and remember the woman who died on the other side of it, and all the things that came up from under the soil with her.